The wind didn't howl anymore. It screamed. Caleb Mercer stood at the single frost-cracked window of his cabin, watching the world disappear beneath white fury. Snow came horizontal now, driven by a wind that seemed determined to rip the roof clean off. Somewhere out there, maybe 100 yards, maybe 1,000, impossible to tell, the tree line marked the edge of his property. He couldn't see it. Couldn't see anything except the endless churning white that had swallowed Montana whole 3 days ago. Behind him, Maisie was crying again. The sound cut through him worse than any Lakota arrow ever had. Worse than watching his company torn apart at the Little Bighorn. Worse than burying Sarah with his own hands while the first snow of the season fell on fresh-turned earth. Maisie's cry wasn't the healthy wail of a hungry baby. It was weaker now, thinner, the kind of sound that made a man's insides go cold. He turned from the window. The cabin's interior was gray with failing light. Just the one window, and it faced north, away from what little sun managed to penetrate the storm. His daughter lay in the wooden crate he'd lined with Sarah's wedding quilt, her face red and pinched, tiny fists jerking at nothing. 3 months old. She'd been born during the first hard frost, came into the world while her mother bled out of it. The midwife had done what she could, but there are some things you can't stitch shut. Some doors that won't close once they're opened. Caleb crossed the room in 4 strides. His knees cracked when he bent, old war wounds mixing with new aches from too many nights sleeping upright in the chair, listening to make sure Maisie kept breathing. "Shh now," he said, his voice coming out rough. "I got you." He didn't, though. That was the hell of it. He lifted her out of the crate, and she felt too light. Babies were supposed to get heavier, weren't they? Supposed to grow. But she seemed smaller every time he picked her up, like she was slowly disappearing. The milk had gone bad 2 days ago. He'd kept it in the coldest corner of the cabin, wrapped in wet cloth the way Sarah had shown him, but it hadn't mattered. The smell when he'd opened the jar had told him everything, sour and wrong. He'd dumped it in the snow and watched it sink, taking his daughter's best chance with it. There was goat milk from the Halversons' place, 10 miles south. Evaporated milk at the trading post in town, 12 miles east. Formula powder at the doctor's office, 15 miles north through terrain that would kill a man even without a blizzard turning the world into white hell. He'd tried mashing potatoes thin enough for her to swallow. Tried sugar water. Tried everything he could think of while the storm raged and the roads became impossible and his daughter's cries got weaker. Now she barely had the strength to cry at all. "You hungry?" he asked, knowing it was a stupid question. Of course she was hungry. Had been for 2 days. He'd managed to get a little water down her throat this morning, but water wasn't enough. Water wasn't milk. He walked her around the cabin, bouncing slightly, the way Sarah used to do. The floorboards creaked under his boots. 17 feet by 23 feet. He'd measured it himself when he built the place 5 years back, when he was young enough to think a man could carve something permanent out of this country if he just worked hard enough. The cabin had 1 room, 1 window, 1 door that rattled in its frame every time the wind hit. A stone fireplace Sarah had insisted on, saying she wouldn't live anywhere that didn't have a proper hearth. A table he'd built from lodgepole pine, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner that he couldn't look at anymore without seeing blood. This was supposed to be a home. Now it felt like a coffin with a leaky roof. Maisie made a small sound against his chest. Not quite a cry, more like a whimper. Her fingers curled and uncurled against his shirt. "I know," he said. "I know." He'd survived 2 years in the army, survived the war against the Sioux when half his regiment ended up scattered across the Montana hills, survived trapping winters that froze men solid in their bedrolls. He knew hunger, knew cold, knew how to read weather and track game and find water where there shouldn't be any. None of that meant a damn thing when it came to keeping one tiny girl alive. The fire was dying. He could see it from across the room, flames getting lower, wood running out. He had maybe enough split logs for 2 more days if he was careful. After that, he'd have to go out to the woodpile, assuming he could find it under 6 feet of snow. Assuming the storm broke long enough for him to see his own hands. He laid Maisie back in her crate, and she started crying immediately. The sound was like a knife. "Just need to feed the fire," he told her. "Just a minute." He crossed to the hearth and added 2 logs from the dwindling pile. Sparks jumped and settled. The wood caught slowly. It was damp, had been sitting too close to the door where the wind forced moisture through every gap in the chinked walls. When he turned back, Maisie had gone quiet. His heart stopped. He was across the room before he could think, dropping to his knees beside the crate hard enough that pain shot through his bad leg. His hands were shaking when he reached for her. She was still breathing, shallow but breathing. Relief hit him so hard he had to brace himself against the floor. This was no way to live, this constant terror. This waiting for the moment when he'd reach down and find her gone cold. He needed help. Needed someone who knew what the hell they were doing, because he sure as hell didn't. But the storm kept screaming outside, and the world beyond his door might as well have been 1,000 miles away. The wind shifted, and somewhere in the cabin something rattled. Caleb's head came up. The sound came again, not the usual creaking and groaning of a structure under siege, but something else, something deliberate. Knocking. Someone was at his door. For a second, he didn't move. Couldn't. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody would be stupid enough to... The knocking came again, harder this time. Insistent. Caleb grabbed the rifle from beside the door. Old habit. You didn't open doors without knowing what was on the other side, not out here. He pulled the door inward. The storm tried to rip it from his hands. Wind and snow exploded into the cabin, and standing in the middle of it all was a figure so bundled in scarves and coats that he couldn't tell if it was man or woman. "Close the damn door!" The voice was definitely female, muffled by fabric but sharp with irritation. Caleb stepped back. The figure pushed inside and he threw his weight against the door, forcing it shut against the wind. Snow swirled across the floorboards. The temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees in 5 seconds. The woman was unwrapping herself, pulling off layers of scarves and a heavy wool coat that looked like it had been made for a man twice her size. Caleb got his first good look at her and felt something like surprise cut through the numb fog he'd been living in. He knew her. Not well. They'd spoken maybe 3 times since she'd arrived in the settlement last fall, but he recognized her. Mabel Rowan, the new teacher, the woman folks in town talked about when they thought she couldn't hear. She was big, not tall, probably didn't clear 5.5 feet, but broad and heavy in a way that made her presence fill the small cabin. Her face was round and flushed from the cold, her dark hair escaping from a bun that had given up trying to stay neat. She had to be close to 40, though it was hard to tell. Her eyes were gray and sharp, and right now they were scanning his cabin with an expression that made him feel like she was taking inventory of every failure. "Where's the baby?" she asked. Caleb blinked. "What?" "Your daughter, Maisie. Where is she?" He gestured toward the crate. Mabel crossed the room without asking permission, snow still falling from her skirts. She knelt, moved with surprising ease for a woman her size, and looked down at the infant. "How long since she ate?" Mabel's voice was all business now. 2 days. Milk went bad." "Water?" "Got some down her this morning." Mabel made a sound that might have been disapproval. She was already pulling off her gloves, reaching into the large canvas bag she'd dropped by the door. She came back with a glass bottle full of something white. "Fresh this morning," she said. "From the Andersons' goat. They've got 3 kids under 5, always got milk to spare." Caleb stared at the bottle like it was a miracle. "You came through the storm with that?" "Wasn't planning to drink it myself." She was already working the stopper free, testing the temperature against her wrist the way Sarah used to do. "You got something clean I can use to feed her?" He found a cloth, hands moving on their own. Watched while Mabel soaked it in milk, then gently pressed it against Maisie's lips. His daughter's mouth worked reflexively, sucking weakly. "That's it," Mabel murmured. "That's a girl." The relief that went through Caleb was so strong it made him dizzy. He grabbed the back of the chair to steady himself. Mabel glanced up at him. "When's the last time you ate?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. Couldn't remember, honestly. Yesterday? Day before? Mabel turned back to Maisie, re-soaking the cloth. "There's bread in my bag. Salt pork. Eat something before you fall over." "I don't need..." "Mr. Mercer?" She didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone made him stop. "Your daughter needs you conscious, so eat." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her he'd been taking care of himself since before she was born, that he didn't need some school teacher coming into his house and giving orders. Instead, he found himself moving toward her bag. found the bread wrapped in wax paper, the pork wrapped in cloth. His stomach growled so loud it was embarrassing. The bread was good, real good, better than anything he'd managed to make in the last 3 months. He ate standing up, watching Mabel work. She was patient with Maisie, didn't try to force anything, just kept offering the milk-soaked cloth, letting the baby set the pace. After a few minutes, Maisie's sucking got stronger, more regular. "She's doing better," Mabel said, "but she's too weak to take much at once. We'll need to feed her small amounts every hour or so for the next day, get her strength back up." "We?" Mabel looked at him. "I'm not going back out in that. Storm's getting worse, not better. You're stuck with me until it breaks." Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. The idea of having someone else in the cabin, having this woman specifically, raised a dozen objections. What would people say? What would it look like? Then he looked at his daughter, finally getting the food she needed, and realized he didn't give a damn what anyone said. "All right," he said. Mabel nodded like it was settled. "You got coffee?" "Some." "Make it. We're going to have a long night." She wasn't wrong. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got meaner, wind hitting the cabin so hard the walls shook. Snow piled against the north side until it reached halfway up the window. The temperature dropped until frost formed on the inside of the door. Mabel fed Maisie every hour like she'd promised. Between feedings, she moved around the cabin like she'd been there all her life, banking the fire properly, finding the leaks where cold air was sneaking in and stuffing them with rags, reorganizing his supplies in a way that actually made sense. Caleb watched her work and felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. Shame, maybe. Or just the acute awareness of how badly he'd been failing at this. "You don't have to do all that," he said finally. Mabel was hanging her wet coat near the fire, trying to dry it out. "Do what?" "Fix everything. I can manage." She looked at him, and there was something in her expression that was harder to read than the storm outside. "I'm sure you can, but there's no prize for managing alone." "I've been alone before." "And how'd that work out for you?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. Mabel sighed. "I'm not trying to... Look, I came here because your daughter needed help, that's all. I'm not here to judge how you're keeping house or tell you what you're doing wrong, but I am here, and I know how to keep a baby alive, so you can either let me help or spend the night being stubborn. Your choice." She turned back to the fire, dismissing him. Caleb stood there feeling like an ass, which he probably was. "Thank you," he said finally. "For coming. For the milk." Mabel's shoulders relaxed slightly. "You're welcome." They fell into an uneasy silence after that. Caleb sat at the table, trying to look busy with the piece of leather he'd been working into a new bootlace for the past week. Mabel settled into the other chair, pulled some knitting from her bag. Of course she'd brought knitting, and her needles started clicking. It should have been awkward. Was awkward at first. But as the night wore on and the storm kept raging and Maisie kept eating and breathing, something in the cabin shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was just the strange intimacy of being trapped together in a small space while the world tried to kill everything outside. But Caleb found himself talking. Not about Sarah, he couldn't go there yet. But about other things. About the war. About his first winter trapping when he'd nearly starved because he didn't know how to preserve meat properly. About building the cabin and having to redo the roof 3 times before it stopped leaking. Mabel listened, didn't interrupt. And when she talked, it was about St. Louis. About teaching school to children who'd never seen a cow. About her sister's family who thought she was crazy for coming west. "Why did you?" Caleb asked. "Come west, I mean." Mabel's needles paused. "Because back there, I was always going to be the fat spinster teaching other people's children. Figured out here, I might get to be something else." The bluntness of it caught him off guard. Nobody talked like that. Everyone pretended, kept up appearances. "And is it different?" he asked. "Out here?" Her smile was small and didn't reach her eyes. "Not really. People are people everywhere. They just dress different." He thought about the things he'd heard said about her in town, about how she was too fat to find a husband, too plain, too old, about how she ate too much and probably couldn't cook worth a damn despite what logic would suggest. The cruelty of it had never really registered before. Not his business, he'd figured. Now, sitting across from her while she saved his daughter's life, The casual meanness of those comments felt uglier. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For, I don't know, people." Mabel's smile turned more genuine. "Well, that's a broad apology, but I'll take it." Around midnight, Maisie woke crying. Mabel had her fed and soothed before Caleb could even stand up. He watched her hold his daughter, watched the easy confidence in her movements, and felt something crack in his chest. "You're good at that," he said. "I've had practice. Helped raise my sister's 5. Why didn't you have your own?" The question was out before he could stop it. Mabel went very still. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quickly. "That's not... I shouldn't have... It's fine." Mabel's voice was level. "The answer is nobody ever asked. And before you say something about how that's impossible or I must have had offers, let me save you the trouble. I didn't. Men don't ask women like me. We're useful. We're good with children. We can cook and clean, and we're grateful for any attention we get, but we don't get asked." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to draw blood. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Didn't have words for the sudden anger he felt on her behalf, which was stupid because he barely knew her. "Their loss," he said finally. Mabel looked at him like she was trying to figure out if he meant it. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded once, then turned her attention back to Maisie. The night stretched on. The storm didn't break. They took turns sleeping, one of them always awake to tend the fire and check on Maisie. Caleb took first watch, and when he woke Mabel around 3 in the morning, she moved from his bed to the chair without comment. He tried not to think about the fact that she'd been sleeping in his bed. Tried not to notice how the cabin smelled different now, like lavender soap and something else he couldn't name. By dawn, the storm was still going, but Maisie was visibly stronger. She drank more eagerly now, her color better, her cries louder. Caleb stood at the window watching the endless white and felt the tight knot in his chest start to loosen. "She's going to be all right," Mabel said from behind him. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Storm should break by tomorrow. Maybe the day after." Another nod. "I'll need to get back when it does. School's been closed 3 days already." Right. Silence settled between them again. But it was different now. Heavier with things unsaid. "I appreciate what you've done," Caleb said finally, turning to face her. "Don't know how to repay it." Mabel was at the table, measuring out milk for Maisie's next feeding. "Don't need repayment. Just needed to help. Still, if there's anything..." "There isn't." The finality in her tone stopped him. He watched her work, this woman who'd risked her life to save his daughter, who was already pulling away now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Mabel glanced up. "You're going to anyway." "Fair point." "Why did you really come? Out here in the storm. You could have died." She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still on the bottle. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "Because I heard you'd run out of milk, and I know what happens to babies who don't eat, and I couldn't..." She stopped, started again. "I couldn't just sit in my warm room knowing there was a child suffering." Most people would have. Then most people are cowards. The simple conviction in her voice made something shift in Caleb's chest. He'd spent 3 months feeling like he was drowning, like he was the only person left in the world who gave a damn about his daughter surviving. And here was this woman he barely knew, who'd walked through hell to make sure Maisie lived. "You're something else, Miss Rowan," he said. Mabel's cheeks colored slightly. "I'm just a school teacher who doesn't know when to mind her own business." "No, you're more than that." She looked at him then, really looked, and Caleb saw something in her eyes he recognized, the same bone-deep loneliness that had been eating him alive for months. The moment stretched, broke when Maisie started fussing. Mabel turned away first. Time to eat again. The rest of the day passed in strange domesticity. They fell into rhythms without discussing them, Caleb keeping the fire going and the cabin warm, Mabel managing Maisie and somehow producing meals from his meager supplies that actually tasted like food. They talked less than they had the night before, but the silence between them felt comfortable now, natural. When night fell again, Caleb offered to sleep in the chair. "Don't be ridiculous," Mabel said. "Bed's big enough for 2 if we're sensible about it." "That wouldn't be proper." Mabel laughed. Actually laughed. The first real laughter he'd heard from her. "Mr. Mercer," we're already alone in a cabin together during a blizzard. That ship sailed yesterday. We can either both sleep poorly trying to maintain propriety that's already shot, or we can both sleep decently and face whatever gossip comes. He wanted to argue, couldn't find the grounds for it. They ended up on opposite sides of the bed, fully clothed, with a rolled blanket between them for good measure. Caleb lay in the dark listening to Mabel breathe and tried not to think about how long it had been since another person had been in this bed. Tried not to think about how much easier it was to breathe with her there. The storm finally broke on the third day. Caleb woke to silence. Real silence, not just a lull between wind gusts. He got up carefully, trying not to wake Mabel, and crossed to the window. Blue sky. Actual blue sky, the first he'd seen in nearly a week. The snow had stopped. The world outside was buried under drifts that would take days to clear, but the storm itself was done. Behind him, he heard Mabel stirring, heard Maisie start to fuss, the sounds of mourning in a house that wasn't empty anymore. "It's over," he said, without turning around. "I see that." There was something in her voice that made him look back. Mabel was sitting up, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face still soft with sleep. She looked younger like this, less guarded. "I should go," she said. "They'll be worried in town. Roads won't be clear yet. I'll manage." She was already moving, gathering her things, building the walls back up. Caleb watched her and felt something close to panic. "You could stay," he said, "until the roads are better. It's safer." Mabel paused, her coat halfway on. "Mr. Mercer." "Caleb, and I'm not saying, I just mean—" He stopped, tried again. "I'd appreciate the help. With Maisie. You're better at this than I am." It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. Mabel finished putting on her coat. "You'll be fine. You're already doing better. Because of you. Because you're learning." She picked up her bag, hesitated. "I'll check on you, both of you, once the road's clear." It wasn't enough. Wasn't close to enough. But Caleb nodded because what else could he do? He watched her bundle up against the cold, watched her pick her way through snow that came up to her knees, watched until she disappeared behind the tree line, and even then he stood at the window, looking at the place where she'd been. Behind him, Maisie started crying. Caleb turned from the window and went to his daughter, fed her with the last of the milk Mabel had brought, held her while she settled. The cabin felt too empty now, too quiet. It had been empty for 3 months, but he'd gotten used to it, had almost preferred it, because being alone meant not having to pretend he was holding together. 3 days with Mabel, Rowan had ruined that. 3 days, and now the silence felt wrong. The space felt too big. His daughter's cries echoed off walls that suddenly seemed too far apart. Caleb sat in his chair and tried to remember how to be alone. It didn't work. The week after the storm, Caleb learned what it meant to be functional without being whole. He managed. Fed Maisie on schedule, using the milk Mabel had left and the additional supplies he dug out from the settlement once the roads became passable. Changed her when she needed changing, kept the fire going, kept the cabin from falling apart. He was doing everything right, checking all the boxes that meant his daughter would survive. But the silence ate at him. He'd catch himself listening for footsteps that wouldn't come, for the sound of knitting needles clicking or the rustle of skirts moving across floorboards. He turned toward the table expecting to see Mabel sitting there, then remember she was gone. Stupid. He barely knew the woman. 3 days didn't mean anything, except it did. 10 days after the storm broke, he was outside splitting wood when he heard a wagon coming up the road. His hand stilled on the axe. The settlement was 2 miles south, and most folks didn't have much reason to visit the Mercer place. Not anymore. The wagon came into view, Lars Halverson's rig, the big Norwegian driving with his usual careful attention. But it wasn't Lars who had Caleb's attention. Mabel sat beside him on the bench, bundled against the cold, a large basket on her lap. Caleb's heart did something complicated in his chest. He set down the axe and walked toward the wagon, brushing wood chips from his shirt. Lars pulled the horses to a stop. "Afternoon, Mercer." "Lars?" Caleb nodded to the big man, then looked at Mabel. "Miss Rowan." "Mr. Mercer." Her voice was formal, careful, like they were strangers instead of 2 people who'd slept in the same bed 3 nights running. "Mabel here was heading out to check on you and the baby. Lars said. Road's still rough, so I offered to drive. Appreciate that, Caleb said, meaning it. Lars was good people, one of the few in the settlement who didn't spend his time minding everyone else's business. Mabel climbed down from the wagon with more grace than her size would suggest. Lars tipped his hat. I got some deliveries to make. Be back in an hour or so to collect you, Mabel. That's fine. Thank you, Lars. The wagon pulled away, leaving them standing in the yard. The wind kicked up snow dust around their feet. You didn't have to come all this way, Caleb said. I told you I'd check on you both. Mabel's chin lifted slightly. How is she? Good. Better. Come inside. The cabin felt smaller with her in it again, or maybe Caleb had just gotten used to the emptiness. Mabel went straight to Maisie's crate, setting down her basket to examine the baby with practiced efficiency. She's gained weight, Mabel said, and there was real pleasure in her voice. You've been feeding her properly. Followed what you showed me. And you look like you've been eating too. Good. She straightened, brushing her hands on her skirts, and Caleb saw her taking in the cabin. He'd tidied before going out to split wood, but it was still rough living, bachelor living, even with a baby added to the mix. I brought more supplies, Mabel said, moving to her basket. Milk from the Andersons, some jars of preserves. Bread I baked yesterday. She paused, pulled out a small cloth bundle. And this. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tiny dress, pale yellow with white stitching around the collar. Made it for Maisie, Mabel said, not quite meeting his eyes. Thought she could use something that wasn't cut down from adult clothes. Caleb took the dress, feeling the softness of the fabric. The stitching was precise, delicate. Hours of work, easily. He stopped. His throat had gone tight. It's beautiful. Thank you. It's practical, Mabel corrected, but her cheeks had colored. Can't have her running around in flour sacks. She's 3 months old. She's not running anywhere. Well, eventually. The moment hung between them, awkward and warm at the same time. Caleb set the dress down carefully. Can I make you coffee? He asked. Before Lars gets back? Mabel hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice. They fell into the rhythms from the storm without discussing it, Caleb working the coffee while Mabel checked on Maisie, straightened things that didn't need straightening, moved around the cabin like she belonged there. When the coffee was ready, they sat at the table. Caleb poured 2 cups, added sugar to Mabel's without asking because he'd noticed during the storm that she took it sweet. How's school? He asked. Chaotic. Half the children forgot everything they learned before the storm, and the other half are wild from being cooped up too long. She sipped her coffee. But we're managing. You like it, teaching? Most days. Mabel's fingers traced the rim of her cup. It's good work, important work. Even if some of the parents seem to think I'm just watching their children instead of actually educating them. They say that? Not to my face, but I hear things. Her smile was thin. Small town, word travels. Caleb thought about the things he'd heard said about her, wondered how many had made it back to her ears. People are idiots, he said. Mabel's laugh was unexpected and genuine. That's one way to put it. It's the truth. You're a good teacher. Anyone with sense can see that. And you know this how? You don't have children in school. I see how the Halverson kids act around you, how they talk about you. That kind of respect, you can't fake it. Mabel went quiet, studying him over her coffee cup. You pay attention to things, don't you? Habit from the war. Pay attention or die. Must have been hard. The war. Caleb shrugged. It was what it was. That's not an answer. It's the only one I got. She nodded, accepting that. They drank their coffee in silence that felt companionable rather than strained. Outside, Caleb could hear Lars's wagon returning already, the hour having passed faster than seemed possible. Mabel stood, gathering her things. I should go. You just got here, and Lars is waiting. She pulled on her coat, then paused. I could come back. Next week, maybe. If Maisie needs. We'd like that, Caleb said quickly. Too quickly, probably, but he didn't care. Both of us would like that. Mabel's smile was small but real. Next week, then. She left, and the cabin went empty again. But this time, it felt different. This time, there was something to look forward to. Mabel came back the next week, and the week after that, and the one after that. It became a pattern. Every Saturday, Lars would drive her out, wait an hour, and drive her back. Mabel would spend that hour checking on Maisie, bringing supplies, talking with Caleb over coffee. The settlement noticed, of course. Caleb heard about it when he went into town for supplies 3 weeks into this new arrangement. He was at the trading post settling his account with Henry Morrison when 2 women came in, Mrs. Schneider and Mrs. Yates, both of whom seemed to think their primary occupation was knowing everyone's business. They didn't see him at first. Or maybe they didn't care. "I'm just saying it doesn't look proper," Mrs. Schneider was saying, her voice pitched to Carrie. "A woman going out to visit a widower every week. People talk." "Well, she's not exactly what you'd call desirable, is she?" Mrs. Yates replied. "Poor Caleb probably just tolerates her because she helps with the baby." "Still, there's appearances to consider, and you know how Mabel is. Probably thinks this is her chance to snag a husband." They both laughed. The sound made Caleb's hands tighten on the counter. Henry Morrison cleared his throat loudly. "Ladies, Mr. Mercer is standing right there." The women turned, their faces going from malicious glee to embarrassed horror in the space of a heartbeat. Caleb looked at them, didn't say anything, just looked until they both found reasons to be somewhere else. When they were gone, Henry shook his head. "Don't mind them. They'd find fault with the sunrise if it gave them something to gossip about." "What exactly are people saying?" Caleb asked. Henry looked uncomfortable. "Does it matter?" "It might." The shopkeeper sighed. "The kind thing, that Miss Rowan is helping you with your daughter, and it's neighborly. The unkind thing?" He paused. "That she's angling to replace your wife, and you're either too grief-struck or too desperate to see it." Caleb felt anger rising in his chest, hot and immediate. "And what do you think?" "I think people should mind their own damn business," Henry said firmly. "I think Miss Rowan is a decent woman doing a kind thing, and if folks want to make it ugly, that says more about them than it does about either of you." It was a good answer. Didn't make Caleb feel any better about the situation, but it was a good answer. He finished his business and headed home, Henry's words turning over in his mind. People were talking. Of course they were talking, and maybe he should care about that more than he did. The problem was, he didn't care. Not really. Let them talk. Mabel was helping with Maisie, and more than that, she was... What? A friend? Something more? Caleb didn't know. Didn't want to examine it too closely because examining it meant acknowledging that the empty cabin bothered him less on Saturdays than it did the rest of the week. Meant acknowledging that he found himself looking forward to those visits in a way that had nothing to do with Maisie needing care. When Saturday came, he was ready for it. Had coffee made before Mabel arrived. Had tidied the cabin more than usual. Had even shaved, which felt stupid the moment he'd done it, but he'd done it anyway. Mabel came in with her usual basket and her usual efficiency, but something in her manner was different, quieter, more reserved. "Everything all right?" Caleb asked. "Fine." She busied herself with Maisie, not meeting his eyes. "You're lying." That got her attention. She looked up, something sharp in her expression. "Excuse me?" "You heard me? Something's wrong." Mabel set down the jar she'd been holding with more force than necessary. "What do you want me to say, Mr. Mercer? That I'm tired of being the subject of town gossip? That I'm tired of hearing about how I'm throwing myself at you like some desperate old maid? Because I am. I'm tired of all of it." The bitterness in her voice cut deeper than the words themselves. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad," Caleb said quietly. "Well, now you do." Mabel turned back to Maisie, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Maybe I should stop coming, for your sake, if not mine." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. Mabel froze. "I don't give a damn what they're saying," Caleb continued, "and I don't want you to stop coming. It's not that simple. Why not? Either you want to be here or you don't." Mabel spun to face him fully. "Of course I want to be here. That's the whole problem. Don't you see? I want to be here, and they're turning it into something cheap and calculating, and I can't." She stopped, took a breath. "I won't be the woman who trapped a grieving widower because she couldn't find a man any other way." The pain in her voice was raw enough to hurt. Caleb crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. "Listen to me," he said. "You didn't trap anyone. You saved my daughter's life. You've been helping when you didn't have to, expecting nothing in return. Anyone who says different is a liar and an idiot. But they're saying it anyway. Let them. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're calling desperate. No, I'm the one they're calling too stupid to see I'm being manipulated. Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. We're both getting carved up by the gossip mill, Mabel. Difference is, I stopped caring what they think a long time ago. She searched his face. When? When I buried my wife and realized that all their sympathy and their casseroles and their well-meaning advice didn't mean a damn thing when I was alone at 3 a.m. listening to my daughter scream. He paused. They can think whatever they want. Doesn't change what's true. And what's true? The question hung between them. Caleb knew he was standing at some kind of edge, knew that what he said next would matter. Truth is, those Saturday visits are the best part of my week, he said. Truth is, this cabin feels less empty when you're in it. And truth is, I'm asking you to keep coming, not because I need help with Maisie, though I do, but because I want you here. Mabel's eyes had gone wide. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quickly. I'm just telling you where I stand. You want to keep this strictly about helping with the baby? We can do that. You want to stop coming altogether because the gossip's too much? I'll understand. But don't stop coming because you think you're imposing or manipulating or any of the other garbage they're saying. Please. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Mabel's hands had gone still. Her face was unreadable. Finally, she spoke. You want honesty? Always. I'm terrified. The words came out barely above a whisper. I'm terrified that I'm reading this wrong, that you're just grateful and lonely, and I'm convenient. I'm terrified that even if it's real now, you'll wake up one day and realize you settled for the fat school teacher because you didn't have better options. Mabel, let me finish. She held up a hand. I'm terrified that I want this too much, want you too much, want to be part of Maisie's life too much. Because I've spent 40 years learning that wanting things doesn't mean you get them, and the harder you want something, the worse it hurts when it doesn't work out. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. I can't promise it'll work out. Can't promise I won't mess this up somehow. But I can promise I'm not settling. You're not a consolation prize, Mabel. He struggled for words. You're the first thing that's felt right since Sarah died. Maybe the first thing that's felt right in longer than that. She was crying now, tears running down her cheeks. That's not fair. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because it makes it harder to be sensible about this. Then don't be sensible. Be honest. Mabel wiped at her eyes impatiently. I want to keep coming. I want to be here. She stopped, started again. I want to see where this goes, even though it scares me, even though they're going to talk, even though I'm probably going to get my heart broken. You're not. You can't know that. Neither of us can. She met his eyes squarely. But I'm willing to risk it if you are. Caleb felt something in him settle. I am. They stood there in the middle of the cabin, snow starting to fall outside the window, Maisie sleeping peacefully in her crate, and Caleb realized this was what starting over looked like. Not dramatic, not perfect, just two broken people deciding to try. Lars will be here soon, Mabel said finally. I know. We should probably figure out what we're doing before people start making up their own stories. Caleb considered that. What if we just let them wonder? That'll make it worse. Or it'll make them bored faster. Hard to gossip when there's nothing new to add. Mabel's laugh was watery but genuine. You're either very wise or very foolish. Probably foolish, but I'm too old to care about the difference. The sound of Lars's wagon came sooner than either of them wanted. Mabel gathered her things slower than usual. At the door, she paused. Next Saturday? She asked. Next Saturday, Caleb confirmed. And Mabel? You don't need to bring supplies. Just bring yourself. Her smile was like sunrise. I'll bring both. The weeks that followed fell into new patterns. Mabel still came on Saturdays, but now Caleb sometimes rode into town during the week to see her. They were careful, met at the schoolhouse when other people were around, kept their conversations brief and public. It didn't stop the gossip. If anything, it got worse. But they'd both meant what they said about not caring. March came in hard, bringing late storms that made Caleb worry about Mabel making the trip. She came anyway, trudging through snow that would have stopped most men, arriving with ice in her hair and determination in her eyes. "You're insane," Caleb told her, pulling her inside before she froze solid. "Probably," Mabel agreed, unwrapping layers of scarves. "But Maisie needs her Saturday visit, doesn't she?" Maisie, now 5 months old, had indeed started recognizing Mabel. Would kick her legs and make happy sounds when Mabel picked her up. It did something to Caleb's heart every time he saw it. They were sitting by the fire one afternoon, Mabel holding Maisie, Caleb pretending to work on a piece of harness that didn't really need mending, when Mabel asked the question he'd been dreading. "Tell me about Sarah." Caleb's hand stilled. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." Mabel's voice was gentle. "But I need to know, Caleb. Need to understand what we're—" She stopped. "I need to know who she was." It was fair, more than fair. And Caleb realized he'd been avoiding it not because it hurt to talk about Sarah, but because he was afraid of what Mabel would think when she knew the whole truth. "She was good," he said finally. "Kind, patient, everything I wasn't." He paused. "We met in Denver 7 years back. I was recovering from a wound that went bad. She was working in the hospital. She was the one who asked me to dinner first. I was too stupid to think a woman like her would be interested." "Why stupid?" "Because she was refined, educated, came from a good family back in Ohio, and I was—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "This, a broken-down soldier who could barely read." "You read fine," Mabel said. "Now, Sarah taught me. Spent 2 years teaching me to read properly, write more than my name, do figures beyond basic counting." He smiled at the memory. "She had patience I didn't deserve." "Did you love her?" The direct question caught him off guard. He thought about lying or deflecting, decided Mabel deserved better. "I respected her, cared for her, was grateful to her." He met Mabel's eyes. "I don't know if I loved her the way she loved me, and that's something I'll have to live with." Mabel was quiet for a long moment. "Why did she marry you then? If you didn't love her back?" "Because I tried to, because she thought that was enough." Caleb's throat felt tight. "And because she was pregnant and it was the right thing to do." "Oh." "We made it work, built this place together. She never complained, not once, even though I know she hated it here. Too isolated, too rough, nothing like what she'd grown up with." He paused. "When she died, part of me wondered if it was my fault, if bringing her out here killed her. I know it's not logical. Know that women die in childbirth everywhere, not just on the frontier, but knowing that doesn't change how it feels." Mabel shifted Maisie to her other arm. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked, and because you deserve to know what you're getting into." "Which is what exactly?" "A man who's not good at feelings, who will probably mess this up in ways he can't even imagine yet, who can't promise you anything except honesty and whatever this is we're building." "That's more than most men offer," Mabel said quietly. "You deserve more than most men offer." She looked at him then, really looked, and Caleb saw something shift in her expression. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything." "Every man I ever met back east treated me like I was invisible unless they needed something. Their shirts mended, their children watched, their houses cleaned. I was useful. That was all I was allowed to be." She paused. "You're the first man who's ever looked at me and seen a person instead of a function. Then every man you knew was an idiot." "That's what I keep telling myself." Her smile was soft. "But it helps hearing you say it." Maisie started fussing, breaking the moment. Mabel soothed her automatically, and Caleb watched them together and felt the future taking shape in ways he couldn't quite name. April brought mud and mosquitoes and the first real signs of spring. The settlement started coming back to life after the long winter. Families emerged from their homesteads. The school term picked up again in earnest, and people started paying attention to what was happening between Caleb Mercer and Mabel Rowan. The attention wasn't kind. Caleb heard it in town one morning. He'd ridden in for supplies and stopped at the livery to have his horse reshod. Tom Jensen was working the forge, and 2 other men were there, Pete Guthrie and someone Caleb didn't recognize. They were talking when Caleb walked in. Didn't stop when they saw him. "I'm just saying, it's peculiar," Pete was saying. "Man loses his wife, suddenly he's courting the school teacher? Doesn't sit right." "Maybe he needs help with the baby," Tom offered. "That's what makes it worse. taking advantage of her good nature like that. Everyone knows Mabel would do anything to land a husband. The stranger laughed. Can't blame her. Woman that size, she's got to take what she can get. Caleb set down his saddle carefully. You got something to say about Miss Rowan, Pete? Pete had the grace to look uncomfortable. Just making conversation, Caleb. Making conversation? Or spreading lies about a decent woman? Now hold on. You hold on. Caleb's voice was quiet, which made it more dangerous. You want to talk about me? Fine. I'm used to it. But you leave Mabel out of your garbage. People are going to talk, Pete said defensively. You two making a spectacle of yourselves. We're not making a spectacle of anything. She helps with my daughter. I appreciate it. That's all anyone needs to know. Is it, though? The stranger had stepped forward, still grinning. Because from what I hear, she's over at your place every week, spending hours alone with you. A woman's got to wonder what she's getting in return for all that help. Caleb's fist connected with the man's jaw before he'd consciously decided to swing. The stranger went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. Tom Jensen grabbed Caleb's arm. Easy, Mercer. Let him go, the stranger said, climbing to his feet. I ain't done with him. Yes, you are. Tom's voice carried the weight of years spent breaking up fights. Both of you calm down, or take it outside where I don't have to clean up the mess. The stranger spat blood. Crazy bastard. Keep talking about Miss Rowan and see how crazy I get. Tom pushed Caleb toward the door. Go home, Mercer. Your horse will be ready tomorrow. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to finish what he'd started. But Tom was right. Staying would just make things worse. He rode home with his knuckles throbbing and his temper still hot, kept replaying the conversation, the casual cruelty of how they'd talked about Mabel, the assumption that she was somehow less deserving of respect because of how she looked. By the time he reached the cabin, he'd made a decision. When Saturday came, he was waiting outside when Lars's wagon appeared. Mabel climbed down, took one look at his face, and frowned. What happened? Got in a fight in town. Her eyes went to his bruised knuckles. About? People running their mouths. About us. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded. Mabel sighed. I told you this would happen. And I told you I don't care. He paused. But I'm done pretending this is just about Maisie. What? I'm done being careful, done worrying about what people think. Caleb took a breath. I want to court you properly, Mabel. Want everyone to know that's what we're doing. And if they've got a problem with it, they can answer to me. Mabel's mouth had fallen open slightly. Caleb, you can't just... People are already talking. Let them talk. I'm tired of hiding what I feel because it might make things uncomfortable. And what exactly do you feel? It was the same question she'd asked weeks ago, but this time Caleb had an answer. I feel like I've been living in winter for the last year, and you're the first warm day of spring. I feel like Maisie lights up when she sees you because children know who's safe and who isn't. I feel like I want to build something real with you, if you'll let me. Mabel's eyes had gone bright with tears. You don't have to do this. Don't have to make some grand gesture just because people were cruel. I'm not. I'm doing this because I want to. Because you deserve better than secret conversations and stolen moments. He stepped closer. You deserve to be courted proper. To have everyone know that I think you're remarkable. And if that makes people uncomfortable, well, that's their problem. They'll say terrible things. They already do. It'll get worse. Probably. Caleb reached for her hand. But I'd rather face that with you than spend another week pretending this is something it isn't. Mabel looked down at their joined hands. When she looked back up, there was something fierce in her expression. All right, she said. Court me then. Do it properly. And we'll let the whole damn settlement watch. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Yeah? Yeah. Her smile was tremulous but real. But I'm warning you, Caleb Mercer. You start this. You better be ready to finish it. I'm not interested in being someone's experiment. Neither am I. They stood there in the yard, hands clasped, while Lars pretended not to notice and Maisie's happy babbling drifted through the open cabin door. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't the stuff of storybooks, just two people deciding to try. But sometimes, that's enough. Word spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. By Sunday morning, everyone in the settlement knew that Caleb Mercer was courting Mabel Rowan, not helping her with the baby, not accepting neighborly assistance, courting. The distinction mattered, and the gossip mill spun it into 100 different versions, each uglier than the last. Caleb heard about it when he rode into town Monday for the supplies he hadn't gotten after the fight. Henry Morrison pulled him aside before he could even enter the trading post. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," Henry said quietly. "Wasn't trying to." "Doesn't matter. Half the women in town are scandalized. The other half are taking bets on how long it lasts." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "Let them bet. It's not you I'm worried about." Henry glanced toward the street. "Mabel's taking the worst of it. Had 3 families pull their kids from school this morning. Said they wouldn't have their children taught by a woman of questionable character." The words hit Caleb like a punch. "That's ridiculous?" "Yeah, but that's how people are." Henry shook his head. "Just thought you should know what you're up against." Caleb left the trading post without buying anything. Rode straight to the schoolhouse instead. The building sat on the edge of town, a simple structure with windows on both sides and a bell tower that hadn't held a bell in years. Caleb could hear Mabel's voice through the open door, leading the remaining students through their multiplication tables. He waited outside until the lesson ended, watched the children file out, fewer than there should have been. Watched Mabel stand in the doorway, her shoulders straight despite everything, waving goodbye to each one. When the last child had gone, she saw him. Her expression flickered, surprise, then something that might have been relief. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "People will talk." "They're already talking." Caleb dismounted, tied his horse to the rail. "Heard about the families pulling their kids." Mabel's composure cracked slightly. "News travels fast." "You all right?" "I'm fine," but her voice wavered on the word. "It's just, I knew there would be consequences, but I didn't think they'd take it out on the school. These children need education, and because some parents are narrow-minded..." She stopped, took a breath. "I'm fine." She wasn't. Caleb could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands twisted together. "This is my fault," he said. "No, it's their fault for being cruel." Mabel straightened. "I knew what I was agreeing to, Caleb. I'm not some fragile flower that wilts at the first sign of adversity." "I know that, but I didn't mean to cost you your job." "You haven't. Not yet, anyway." She managed a thin smile. "The school board meets Thursday. They'll decide whether to keep me on or find someone more suitable." "Suitable meaning what? Someone who doesn't court widowers?" "Someone who doesn't make the respectable families uncomfortable." Mabel's voice had gone bitter. "Someone who knows her place." Caleb wanted to hit something, wanted to ride back into town and make everyone who'd said a word against her answer for it. But that would only make things worse. "What can I do?" he asked instead. "Nothing. This is something I have to handle myself." Mabel stepped back toward the schoolhouse. "You should go, Caleb. Being seen together will only add fuel to the fire." "I don't care about..." "Well, I do." The sharpness in her voice stopped him. "I care because this is my livelihood. Because if I lose this job, I lose everything. I don't have a homestead to fall back on. I don't have family here. All I have is teaching, and if they take that away because of me courting you, then what?" The fear underneath her anger was clear. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. "Then you come stay with me and Maisie," he said. "You don't have to face this alone." Mabel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And prove them all right? That I was angling for a husband all along? That I'm just desperate enough to throw myself at the first man who showed me kindness? That's not what this is. Maybe not to us, but that's what they'll say." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I need to fight this on my own terms, Caleb. Need to show them I'm not who they think I am. And I can't do that if you keep trying to rescue me." The words stung, but he understood them. Understood the need to prove yourself on your own merits without help that might look like weakness. "All right," he said quietly. "But if you need anything, I know where you live." Caleb mounted his horse, looked back at Mabel standing in the schoolhouse doorway, her chin up despite everything. She looked small and defiant and completely alone. He wanted to stay. Wanted to stand beside her and face down anyone who had something to say. But she'd asked him to go, and maybe respecting that was more important than his need to fix things. The ride home was long and bitter. Thursday came with rain. Caleb spent the day working around the homestead, trying not to think about the school board meeting happening in town, trying not to imagine what Mabel was facing. He failed spectacularly at both. By evening, he was pacing the cabin like a caged animal. Maisie watched him from her crate, making the happy babbling sound she'd recently discovered. Under other circumstances, it would have made him smile. Now it just reminded him that his daughter had gotten attached to a woman who might not be allowed to visit anymore. The sound of a horse approaching brought him to the window. It was full dark now, the rain still coming down steady. He grabbed his rifle out of habit, then saw who it was. Mabel sat hunched in her saddle, soaked through despite the heavy coat. She looked exhausted. Caleb had the door open before she could dismount. "Get inside, you'll catch your death." She slid from the horse without arguing. Caleb led the animal to the lean-to that served as a stable, got it settled, then hurried back to the cabin. Mabel was standing by the fire, dripping on the floor, shaking with cold. Caleb grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What happened?" he asked. "I kept my job." Her voice was flat. "Barely." "That's good though, right?" "Is it?" Mabel pulled the blanket tighter. "They told me I could stay on as long as I maintained proper decorum. No more visits to your homestead. No more being seen with you in town. Nothing that might scandalize the families." Caleb felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "They can't do that." "They can and they did. I'm employed at their pleasure, Caleb. They don't need a reason to dismiss me, but they were kind enough to give me conditions instead." The bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. "Mrs. Yates actually told me I should be grateful they're being so understanding." Understanding. Caleb's hands clenched. "They're blackmailing you. They're protecting their investment. Can't have the children corrupted by a teacher with loose morals." "Your morals aren't loose. We spent 3 nights alone together during the storm. We've been courting for weeks. By their standards, that's practically living in sin." Mabel's laugh was harsh. "The fact that nothing improper happened doesn't matter. The appearance is what counts." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to point out the hypocrisy of a town where men routinely visited saloons and no one blinked, but let a woman accept courtship and suddenly she was scandalous. But arguing wouldn't change anything. "So what are you going to do?" he asked instead. Mabel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was small. "I don't know." She looked defeated in a way he'd never seen before. This woman who'd walked through a blizzard to save his daughter, who'd faced down gossip and cruelty with her head high, was finally breaking under the weight of it all. Caleb crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for maybe half a second, then collapsed against him. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs that she clearly didn't want him to hear, but couldn't hold back anymore. "I'm so tired," she whispered against his chest. "Tired of fighting. Tired of defending myself. Tired of being judged for things that shouldn't matter." "I know. And the worst part is, they're making me choose. Between my job and you. Between my independence and being happy." She pulled back enough to look at him, her face blotchy and wet. "How is that fair?" "It's not." "So what do I do?" Caleb wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell them all to go to hell. I want to keep teaching because I'm good at it and the children need me. I want to keep courting you because you make me happy. I want to have both and not have to apologize for either." "Then do that." "I can't. If I keep seeing you, I lose my job. If I lose my job, I have nothing." "You'd have me." The words hung between them. Mabel searched his face. "Is that enough?" she asked quietly. "Because right now I need to know if this is real or if I'm about to sacrifice everything for something that might not last." It was a fair question, more than fair, and Caleb realized this was the moment where he either committed or let her go. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "Can't promise I won't mess up, or that people will stop talking, or that you won't have regrets. But I can promise I'm in this for real, that I want to build something with you that lasts. That when I think about the future, you're in it." He paused. "Is that enough?" Mabel's face crumpled. "It has to be, doesn't it? Because I'm already in too deep to walk away." She kissed him then. It was desperate and messy and tasted like tears, and Caleb felt something in him settle. This was real. Whatever happened next, this was real. When they finally broke apart, Mabel rested her forehead against his. "I'm going to lose my job. Probably." And people are going to say terrible things. Definitely. And I'm still going to do this anyway, because apparently I'm an idiot. Caleb smiled against her hair. Then we'll be idiots together. They stood there while the rain hammered the roof and the fire crackled and Maisie babbled happily to herself. Outside, the world was cold and cruel and waiting to judge them. Inside, for this moment at least, they had each other. It would have to be enough. The next 2 weeks were harder than the winter storm. Mabel kept teaching, but 3 more families pulled their children. The school board watched her like hawks, looking for any excuse to dismiss her. She stopped coming to the homestead entirely, knowing that being seen traveling that direction would be the end. Caleb tried to respect her space, tried to give her room to fight her own battles. It damn near killed him. He saw her in town once, outside the trading post. She was talking to Mrs. Halverson, and when she saw Caleb, her eyes lit up for just a second before she remembered herself and looked away. The deliberate dismissal hurt worse than any insult. He understood it, understood she was trying to protect her position, didn't make it easier to swallow. By the 3rd week, he was going crazy. Maisie was fussy because she missed Mabel. The cabin felt emptier than it had before Mabel started visiting, and Caleb found himself angry at a world that would rather see people miserable and proper than happy and scandalous. He was splitting wood with more force than necessary when Lars Halverson rode up. "Heard you might need some help," Lars said, dismounting. "I'm managing." "That's not what I asked." The big Norwegian grabbed a maul and started splitting logs alongside Caleb. They worked in silence for a few minutes before Lars spoke again. "Ingrid wanted me to invite you and Maisie for dinner Sunday, after church." "Not sure that's a good idea. People might talk." Lars snorted. "People talk anyway. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about." Caleb set down his axe. "You know what's being said about Mabel and me?" "Yeah, most of it's garbage." Lars split a particularly stubborn log with one clean strike. "But some folks think you're doing right by her. Ingrid says it's about time someone saw Mabel for what she is instead of what she looks like." "Your wife is a wise woman." "Don't I know it?" Lars grinned. "So Sunday, say yes. Maisie could use some time around other children, and you could use some time around people who aren't idiots." Caleb found himself agreeing before he'd fully thought it through. Sunday came clear and bright. Caleb got Maisie dressed in the yellow dress Mabel had made, brushed his own hair into something approaching respectability, and rode into town. The Halverson place was on the north edge of the settlement, a sprawling house that somehow managed to hold Lars, Ingrid, and their 5 children without bursting at the seams. Caleb could hear the chaos before he even dismounted. Ingrid met him at his door, a round-faced woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "Caleb, and this must be Maisie. Oh, she's gotten so big." She swept the baby out of his arms with practiced ease, cooing in a mix of English and Norwegian. Caleb followed her inside, feeling awkward and out of place. The feeling lasted right up until he saw Mabel sitting at the dining table. She looked up when he entered. Surprise crossed her face, then something softer. "You didn't tell me Caleb was coming," she said to Ingrid. "Didn't I? Must have slipped my mind." Ingrid's expression was pure innocence. "Well, you're both here now. Might as well eat." It was a setup, a blatant, obvious setup, and Caleb didn't care even a little bit. Dinner was loud and messy and wonderful. The Halverson children ranged from 12 down to 3, and they treated Maisie like a new toy. Mabel relaxed in increments, the tension leaving her shoulders as the meal progressed. After dinner, while Ingrid put the younger children down for naps, and Lars took the older ones outside, Caleb and Mabel found themselves alone on the porch. "That was kind of them," Mabel said, "setting this up. Lars said Ingrid thought we could use friendly faces." "She's not wrong." Mabel looked out at the settlement spreading below them. "I've missed you, missed this." "Then come back." "You know I can't." "Can't or won't." Mabel's eyes flashed. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair." "But we're letting them win, Mabel. We're giving them exactly what they want. You miserable and alone, me the same. I'm trying to keep my job by giving up everything else that matters? What kind of victory is that?" They were both standing now, voices rising. Inside the house, Caleb could hear Ingrid shushing the children. "You don't understand," Mabel said. "Teaching is all I have. It's the only thing I'm good at. Without it, I'm nothing." "That's a lie and you know it. You're good at 100 things. You're smart and capable and fat, old, unmarriageable. The words came out bitter. Those are the things that matter out here, Caleb. I can be the best teacher in Montana, but at the end of the day, I'm still the fat spinster nobody wants. I want you. For now. Until you realize you can do better. The words hit him like a slap. You really think that? After everything? Mabel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I think people show you who they are eventually, and I think I've spent 40 years learning not to trust pretty words. Caleb felt something break inside him. Sarah left me a letter before she died. Want to know what it said? Mabel looked startled by the change of subject. What? It said she knew I didn't love her the way she loved me, that she'd always known, and that she forgave me for it because at least I tried. He had to stop, get his voice under control. She died knowing I'd failed her, died knowing that even though I was a decent husband on paper, I'd never given her what she really needed. Caleb, so I'm telling you this because you need to understand something. I'm not good at feelings, never have been. But what I feel for you is different than anything I felt for Sarah. It's messy and complicated and scares the hell out of me. And yeah, maybe it won't last. Maybe we'll crash and burn. But I'd rather fail at something real than succeed at pretending. Mabel was crying now, tears running down her face. Why are you saying this? Because you're standing here telling me you're nothing without your job, and that's the biggest load of horse manure I've ever heard. You saved my daughter's life. You brought warmth back into a house that was dying. You made me want to try again when I'd given up on damn near everything. He stepped closer. So don't tell me you're nothing, and don't tell me I'll realize I can do better because there is no better. There's just you, and you're more than enough. The silence that followed was broken only by Mabel's quiet sobbing. Caleb wanted to reach for her, but didn't know if he should. Then she closed the distance between them and pressed her face against his chest. I'm so scared, she whispered. Scared of losing everything. Scared of taking a chance and having it blow up in my face. I know. And I'm scared that if I choose you over the job, I'll resent you for it later. The honesty of that hurt, but Caleb appreciated it. That's fair? Is it? Mabel pulled back enough to look at him. Because it doesn't feel fair. It feels selfish and petty and human, Caleb finished. It feels human, and that's okay. Mabel wiped at her eyes. What do we do now? I don't know, but I know what I want. What? I want you to come back to the homestead. I want us to stop sneaking around and pretending this isn't happening. I want to court you properly, the way you deserve. He paused. And if that means you lose your job, then we figure out what comes next together. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one losing everything. No, I'm just asking you to trust me with everything, which might be worse. Mabel's laugh was watery. You're probably right about that. They stood on the porch while the spring afternoon stretched around them. Inside, Caleb could hear Maisie starting to fuss, could hear Ingrid soothing her with Norwegian lullabies. I need time, Mabel said finally, to think about this properly, to figure out what I'm willing to risk. That's fair. And I need you to understand that if I walk away, it's not because I don't care. It's because I'm trying to survive. The words cut deep, but Caleb nodded. I understand. Mabel kissed his cheek, soft and sad. Then she went inside to say goodbye to Ingrid and the children. Caleb stood on the porch and watched the afternoon fade into evening, wondered if he just lost the best thing that had happened to him in years. The answer came 4 days later. Caleb was in the yard fixing fence posts when he heard the wagon, looked up to see not Lars's rig but a smaller cart driven by Mabel herself. She pulled to a stop in front of the cabin. Her face was set, determined. I quit, she said without preamble. Caleb dropped his hammer. What? I quit. Told the school board this morning that they could take their conditions and their judgment and shove them straight to hell. Mabel climbed down from the cart. Well, I didn't say that last part out loud, but I thought it very aggressively. Mabel, you didn't have to... Yes, I did. She squared her shoulders. Because you were right. They were making me choose between being miserable and proper or happy and scandalous. And I've spent 40 years being miserable and proper, and I'm done with it. Caleb felt his heart start racing. What are you saying? I'm saying I choose happy. I choose scandalous. I choose you, if you'll still have me after I was such a coward about all of this. You weren't a coward. I was terrified. That's not the same thing. Caleb crossed the distance between them. And yes, I'll still have you. For as long as you'll put up with me. Mabel's smile was tremulous. That might be a while. Good. He kissed her then, properly this time, in broad daylight where anyone passing could see. Mabel kissed him back like she meant it, like she wasn't going anywhere. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing. I have no idea what I'm doing now. No job, no plan, just a very impulsive decision and a cart full of my belongings. We'll figure it out. Will we? Yeah. Caleb took her hand. Together. Inside the cabin, Maisie started crying. Mabel's expression softened. I should get her. Yeah, Caleb agreed. You should. He watched her go inside, watched her scoop up his daughter like she'd been doing it forever, watched Maisie's face light up with recognition and joy. The gossips would have a field day with this. The respectable families would be scandalized. Half the town would probably never speak to either of them again. Caleb found he didn't care even a little bit. They spent the first week figuring out the logistics of living together without actually living together. Mabel kept her room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house in town, maintained the appearance of propriety even as she spent every daylight hour at the homestead. She'd arrive after breakfast and leave before supper, helping with Maisie and the endless work that came with keeping a frontier household running. It was awkward and inefficient and fooled absolutely nobody. This is ridiculous, Caleb said one afternoon. They were in the garden plot behind the cabin, Mabel showing him how to properly space potato plantings while Maisie napped inside. You're paying for a room you don't use and riding 2 miles each way every day. Just move in. Mabel's hands stilled in the dirt. We're not married, Caleb. So let's fix that. The words were out before he'd fully thought them through. Mabel looked up at him, eyes wide. What? Marry me. It wasn't how he'd planned to ask. Hadn't even known he was planning to ask. But now that the words were out, they felt right. Not because it's practical, though it is. Not because people expect it, though they do. But because I want you here. Want to build this life with you proper. Mabel sat back on her heels, dirt on her hands, and confusion on her face. Caleb, we've been courting for less than 2 months. Known you for 6. That's not... People will say I trapped you. People will say whatever they want regardless. Caleb knelt beside her, ignoring the protest from his bad leg. I'm asking because I want to. Because when I think about the future, you're already in it. Might as well make it official. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. You've had others? No, but I've read books. Mabel was trying for stern, but her mouth kept twitching toward a smile. There's supposed to be poetry, declarations of undying love, maybe some flowers. I can get flowers. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Mabel looked at him for a long moment. The point is, I need to know this is real, that you're not just proposing because it solves a problem, or because you feel obligated, or because Maisie needs a mother. She does need a mother. That's not helping your case. Caleb took a breath. This feelings business was harder than breaking horses. You want romance? Fine. You're the first person I want to talk to in the morning and the last person I want to see at night. You make me laugh when I didn't think I remembered how. You're patient with Maisie in ways I'll never be. You're smart and stubborn, and you don't let me get away with anything, which is probably the only reason I haven't completely fallen apart this year. He paused, searching for the right words. I'm not good at pretty speeches, but I know what I want, and I want you, not as help, not as convenience, as my wife, as my partner, as the person I build the rest of my life with. Mabel's eyes had gone suspiciously bright. That's better. So is that a yes? It's a maybe. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her cheek. I need time to think about it. How much time? More than 5 minutes, Caleb. But she was smiling now. This is a big decision. Let me sit with it. He wanted to argue, wanted to point out that they both already knew what they wanted, so why wait? But he'd learned that pushing Mabel just made her dig in harder. All right, he said, take your time. Her answer came 3 days later. Caleb was repairing the cabin's north wall. Winter had opened up some gaps in the chinking that needed filling before next season when Mabel arrived. Earlier than usual, and without her usual basket of supplies. Need to talk to you. she said without preamble. Caleb's stomach dropped. That tone never preceded good news. He set down his tools and followed her inside. Mabel was pacing the small cabin, nervous energy rolling off her in waves. Maisie watched from her crate, babbling commentary. I talked to Reverend Matthews yesterday, Mabel said. Asked him about marriage requirements, notice periods, that sort of thing. Okay. He said we'd need to post bans for 3 weeks. Give anyone with objections time to come forward. She laughed, but it was strained. Like, there won't be objections. Half the town thinks I'm a scheming opportunist, and the other half thinks you've lost your mind. Don't care what they think. I know. That's part of the problem. Mabel stopped pacing, faced him squarely. If we do this, if we get married, it won't be easy. People will talk. Your life will get harder because of me. Maisie will have to grow up hearing things about her stepmother that no child should hear. She'll also grow up with a mother who loves her, who's strong enough to face down whatever garbage people throw at us. Caleb stepped closer. You trying to talk yourself out of this? I'm trying to make sure you know what you're getting into. I know exactly what I'm getting into. Question is whether you do. Mabel's chin lifted. And what exactly am I getting into? A man who's not perfect, who'll probably work too hard and talk too little, who doesn't know the first thing about being a husband to someone he actually... He stopped. The word had almost slipped out. Someone he actually cares about. You were going to say something else. Was I? Caleb. He sighed. Might as well say it. Someone he actually loves. There. Happy? Mabel's breath caught. You love me? Apparently, it came out more defensive than he'd intended. That a problem? No, I just... She pressed a hand to her mouth. When she lowered it, she was crying. Again. The woman cried more than anyone he'd ever met. Nobody's ever said that to me before. The simple honesty of it broke something in Caleb's chest. 40 years old, and nobody had ever told her they loved her. The cruelty of that was staggering. Well, they should have, he said roughly, because you're worth loving. Mabel crossed the distance between them and kissed him hard. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. Yes, she said. Yes, what? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to 3 weeks of bans and public scrutiny. Yes to building a life with you and Maisie. Yes to all of it. Relief hit Caleb so hard his knees nearly buckled. Yeah? Yeah, Mabel laughed. I must be out of my mind, but yeah. He kissed her again, properly this time, and felt the future clicking into place. It wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be smooth, but it would be theirs. The bands went up the following Sunday. Caleb and Mabel sat in the back pew of the small church while Reverend Matthews announced their intention to marry. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mrs. Schneider stood up and walked out. Mrs. Yates followed. Within minutes, half the congregation had found reasons to leave early. Those who remained, the Halversons, Henry Morrison, a handful of others, came forward to offer congratulations that ranged from genuine to awkwardly forced. Caleb accepted them all with the same nod, while Mabel held Maisie and kept her chin up. Outside afterward, Pete Guthrie was waiting. The man who'd been talking trash in the livery, whose friend had taken Caleb's fist to the face. Mercer, Pete said, his tone careful. Got a minute? Caleb handed Maisie to Mabel. Make it quick. Pete glanced at Mabel, then back to Caleb. Wanted to apologize for what I said before about Miss Rowan. Wasn't right. It was probably the closest thing to genuine remorse Pete Guthrie had ever expressed. Caleb studied him, trying to figure out if it was real or if this was some new angle. Why now? Caleb asked. Because my wife tore into me last night. Said I was being cruel and small-minded, and if I didn't apologize, I could sleep in the barn. Pete's ears had gone red. And because she was right. What you and Miss Rowan do is your business. I had no call to make it mine. Mabel had stepped forward. Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. That takes courage. Pete nodded, still not quite meeting her eyes. Hope you'll both be happy. He tipped his hat and left quickly, like he was afraid he'd take the words back if he stayed too long. Well, Mabel said quietly, that was unexpected. His wife's scarier than he is, Caleb said. She tells him to jump. He asks how high. Mabel smiled. Remind me to thank Mrs. Guthrie. The 3 weeks of posted bans felt both endless and too short. Each Sunday brought new drama, families walking out, pointed sermons about moral standards, whispered conversations that stopped when Caleb or Mabel came near. But there were bright spots too. Ingrid Halverson organized a small gathering of women who brought Mabel gifts, preserves, fabric, kitchen tools. It was a modest collection compared to what a more popular bride might receive, but the gesture meant everything. Henry Morrison offered to host the wedding supper at the trading post, free of charge. "Figure you've bought enough supplies from me over the years to earn it," he said, gruff but kind. And Lars Halverson pulled Caleb aside one afternoon with an unexpected gift, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "Ingrid and I talked," Lars said. "We want Mabel to have this. My mother would have liked her, would have respected what she's doing." Caleb tried to refuse. It was too much, but Lars wouldn't hear it. "Just take it," the big Norwegian said. "And treat her right, ja? She's a good woman, deserves good things." "I know." "Then make sure she gets them." The night before the wedding, Mabel stayed at the cabin later than usual. They sat on the porch while Maisie slept inside, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You nervous?" Caleb asked. Terrified. Mabel's laugh was shaky. "Keep waiting for something to go wrong, for you to change your mind, or for the Reverend to refuse to marry us, or for, I don't know, something. I'm not changing my mind. I know. Logically, I know. But there's this voice in my head that keeps saying this is too good to be true, that women like me don't get happy endings." Caleb took her hand. "What if you do, though? What if this is exactly what it looks like? Two people who found each other and decided to build something real? Then I'm the luckiest woman in Montana." She leaned against his shoulder. "And also probably insane for agreeing to this." Little of both, maybe. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Finally, Mabel stood. "I should go. Need to get some sleep before tomorrow." "You could stay." "Caleb, I know, propriety." He walked her to her horse. "See you at the church?" "Unless I come to my senses and run screaming into the wilderness." But she was smiling when she said it. Caleb watched her ride away, then went back inside. Maisie was still sleeping, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. He stood over her crate for a long time, thinking about how much had changed in 6 months. This time last year, he'd been married to a woman he respected but didn't love, working a homestead that felt more like a prison than a home. Now he was about to marry a woman who challenged him and made him laugh and loved his daughter like her own. It was terrifying. It was exactly right. The wedding was small. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony in the church with maybe 20 people in attendance. The Halversons with all 5 children, Henry Morrison, Tom Jensen from the livery, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, and a handful of others who'd decided that friendship mattered more than gossip. The rest of the settlement stayed away, making their disapproval clear through absence. Mabel wore a simple blue dress that Ingrid had helped her alter. No veil, no elaborate decorations, just clean lines and practical fabric. She looked beautiful anyway, or maybe Caleb was biased. Probably biased, didn't care. Ingrid held Maisie during the ceremony, the baby unusually quiet as if she sensed the importance of the moment. Caleb stood at the altar trying not to fidget, watching Mabel walk down the aisle without any father to give her away because her family was 2,000 miles east and hadn't bothered to make the trip. Their loss. Definitely their loss. The ceremony itself was brief. Reverend Matthews kept it simple, skipping the usual lengthy sermon about marriage duties in favor of the essential vows. Caleb repeated his part clearly, meaning every word. Mabel's voice shook slightly on hers, but she got through it. When the Reverend pronounced them married and told Caleb he could kiss his bride, the small gathering erupted in genuine applause. Caleb kissed Mabel, brief and chaste because they were in church, after all, and felt her smile against his lips. "Well," she whispered, "we did it. No going back now." Good. The supper at the trading post was chaotic and warm. Henry had pushed aside merchandise to make room for tables, and people had brought food. Too much food, really, for such a small gathering. But it meant there was plenty to go around, and the atmosphere was celebratory despite everything. Caleb found himself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Mabel was laughing at something Ingrid said. Maisie was being passed around like a beloved toy. And for this one evening, the weight of public judgment felt distant. Lars stood and offered a toast, his English going rougher as emotion took over. To Caleb and Mabel, may they have many years of happiness and many strong children to help work the homestead. Hear, hear! The gathering raised their glasses. Caleb caught Mabel's eye across the table. She was blushing at Lars's mention of children, but smiling too. He smiled back, feeling something warm settle in his chest. They left as the sun was setting, Mabel driving the cart with their combined belongings, while Caleb rode alongside with Maisie secured in a sling across his chest. The baby had fallen asleep, worn out from being the center of attention. The homestead appeared ahead, looking different somehow now that it was officially Mabel's home too. Caleb helped her down from the cart, then carried their things inside while she got Maisie settled. When everything was unloaded and the baby was sleeping peacefully, they stood in the middle of the cabin looking at each other with sudden awkwardness. "So," Mabel said. "So, this is strange." "Little bit." Mabel laughed nervously. "We've spent weeks together, slept in the same bed during the storm, but now it feels different," Caleb finished. "Because it is different. You're my wife now, and you're my husband." She said it like she was testing the words. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We've got time." They stood there in the lamplight, the cabin quiet around them, except for Maisie's soft breathing. Finally, Mabel moved toward the bed, their bed now, and started unpinning her hair. "I should warn you," she said, her back to him. "I snore." "I know. Remember the storm?" "Oh, right." She paused. "And I don't have much experience with—" She gestured vaguely toward the bed. "Mabel." "What?" "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for." Caleb crossed the room, put his hands on her shoulders. "This doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be us." She turned to face him, eyes searching his. "You mean that?" "Yeah. Even though most men would expect, I'm not most men. And you're not most women. We get to figure this out our own way." Mabel's shoulders relaxed under his hands. "Have I mentioned that I love you?" "Not in so many words." "Well, I do. Love you." She said it firmly, like she was making a declaration. "Even though you're stubborn and terrible at talking about feelings and you work too hard, that's quite a list. I'm not done. You're also kind and loyal, and you make me feel like I matter, like I'm more than just, She gestured at herself. "This." Caleb pulled her closer. "You are more than this. You're everything." Now who's being romantic? Must be catching. She kissed him then, and it was different from the other kisses they'd shared. Slower, deeper, full of promise and possibility. When they finally made their way to bed, it was with laughter and fumbling and the kind of awkward tenderness that comes from two people learning each other for the first time. It wasn't perfect, wasn't the stuff of romantic novels, but it was real and it was theirs, and that was enough. The days that followed fell into new rhythms. Mabel took over the running of the household with an efficiency that made Caleb realize just how badly he'd been managing before. She reorganized the pantry, established routines for laundry and cleaning, and somehow made meals appear 3 times a day without it seeming like a major undertaking. More than that, she brought life back to the cabin, hung curtains she'd sewn from fabric scraps, put wildflowers in a jar on the table, sang while she worked, filling the space with sound that wasn't just the wind and Maisie's crying. Caleb found himself working harder on the homestead improvements he'd been putting off. Fixed the sagging porch, expanded the chicken coop, started planning for a proper barn instead of the lean-to that barely kept the weather out. It felt like building instead of just surviving. Felt like there was a future worth planning for. They still got stares when they went into town together. Still had people cross the street to avoid speaking to them. But there were also people like Henry Morrison who went out of their way to be kind. Like the Halversons who invited them for supper regularly. Like Mrs. Patterson who'd hugged Mabel fiercely at the wedding and told her she deserved every happiness. A month after the wedding, Mabel was in the garden when a wagon pulled up. She looked up to see 3 women climbing down, none of whom she recognized immediately. Caleb came out of the barn, hand moving toward the rifle he kept near the door. Old habits. The oldest of the 3 women stepped forward. "Mrs. Mercer? I'm Dorothy Grant. This is my daughter Susan and her friend Elizabeth. We heard you used to teach school. Mabel brushed dirt from her hands, wary. That's right. We were wondering. Dorothy glanced at the other women, then back to Mabel. Our children have been going without proper education since you left. The board hired a replacement, but he's not good with children, just stands at the front and reads from books without explaining anything. I'm sorry to hear that, Mabel said carefully. But I'm not sure what you want me to do about it. What? Susan stepped forward. Teach them. Here, maybe? Or we could arrange a space in town. There are at least a dozen families who'd send their children if you were willing. Mabel felt her heart start racing. The school board made their position clear. They don't want me teaching. The school board doesn't have to know. Dorothy's voice was firm. We'd pay you directly. Not much, but enough to make it worth your while. And we'd handle any trouble that came from it. Caleb had moved closer, standing just behind Mabel. She could feel his presence, solid and supporting. Why? Mabel asked. Why now, after everyone made such a fuss about me leaving? Elizabeth spoke for the first time. Because we were wrong. Some of us, anyway. We let other people's judgment cloud our own, and our children suffered for it. She paused. My son Peter? He's fallen behind in his reading, comes home frustrated every day. Yesterday he asked why the good teacher left, and I didn't have a good answer for him. Mabel felt tears threatening. She'd mourned losing her students more than she'd admitted, even to Caleb. The idea of having them back, even in this unofficial capacity. I'd need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take all the time you need. Dorothy handed her a folded paper. That's a list of families who've expressed interest. If you decide to do it, send word and we'll arrange the details. The women left, and Mabel stood holding the paper like it might disappear if she looked away. You want to do it, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. I miss teaching. Miss the children. Mabel unfolded the paper, scanned the names. 12 families. At least 20 children. But I don't want to cause more trouble. When has trouble ever stopped you before? She laughed despite herself. Fair point. Besides, you'd be doing it here, on our property. School board doesn't have jurisdiction over what happens on private land. They could still make things difficult. Let them try. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. You're a teacher, Mabel, one of the best. These children need you, and I think you need them too. She leaned against him, feeling the truth of it. You wouldn't mind? Having a dozen children tramping through here every day? Long as they don't scare the chickens, we'll manage. Mabel looked down at the paper again, then up at the cabin. It was small, but the space in front would work for outdoor lessons in good weather, and they could maybe partition off part of the barn for when winter came. She was already planning, already imagining it. All right, she said, let's do it. Word spread quickly once Mabel agreed. By the end of the week, she had 15 students confirmed and 3 more maybes. The families contributed materials, slates, chalk, primers, paper. Lars Halverson and Tom Jensen showed up one morning and built a simple shelter near the cabin, open on 3 sides but with a roof to keep off rain and sun. The school board got wind of it, of course, sent Reverend Matthews out to deliver a stern warning about unauthorized educational activities. Mabel listened politely, then pointed out that she wasn't operating a public school, just offering private tutoring on her own property. Nothing illegal about it, nothing they could actually stop without overreaching their authority considerably. Reverend Matthews left, looking uncomfortable but unable to argue the point. Classes started the following Monday. Mabel stood in front of 15 children ranging from 6 to 14, felt nerves and excitement warring in her stomach. Good morning, she said. I'm Mrs. Mercer, and this is going to be different from regular school. We're going to work hard, but we're also going to ask questions and think for ourselves and maybe have some fun while we're at it. Sound good? The chorus of agreement made her smile. Caleb watched from his cabin doorway, Maisie on his hip. His wife stood in front of those children with confidence and purpose, completely in her element. The joy on her face was worth every bit of trouble this might cause. As the days turned to weeks, the unofficial school at the Mercer homestead became an established fact. Parents dropped children off in the morning and picked them up in the afternoon. Mabel taught reading and arithmetic and history, made learning feel like discovery instead of drudgery. The children adored her, brought her wildflowers and interesting rocks, and proudly showed off their improved penmanship. Some of the families started inviting Caleb and Mabel for supper, social barriers slowly crumbling under the weight of gratitude. Not everyone approved. The school board made periodic complaints. Some families in town still refused to acknowledge Mabel's existence, but the tide was slowly, grudgingly turning. One evening in late June, Caleb came in from the fields to find Mabel at the table, correcting assignments with Maisie dozing in her lap. The domestic scene hit him with unexpected force. This was his life now, this warmth and purpose and partnership. "You look happy," Mabel said, glancing up. "I am happy." Caleb crossed the room, kissed the top of her head. All of this, is more than I thought I'd get." Mabel tilted her head back to look at him. "Having regrets?" "Not even close." He pulled out the other chair, sat down. "I was just thinking how different everything is from a year ago. How much better? Better than when you had a proper wife from a good family?" There was still an edge of insecurity in her voice when she mentioned Sarah. Probably always would be. Caleb had learned to address it head on rather than pretend he didn't hear it. "Better than when I was going through the motions and calling it a life," he said. "Sarah was good, but this," he gestured around the cabin, "this is real." Mabel's eyes had gone suspiciously bright. "You're getting better at the romantic speeches." "Must be all the practice." She laughed, then grew serious. "I got a letter today, from my sister back east." "Yeah?" "She heard about the wedding, wanted to know if I'd lost my mind, marrying a widower with a child after knowing him less than a year." Mabel paused. "Said if I needed help, she'd send money for a train ticket home." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "What did you say?" "I haven't written back yet, but I'm going to tell her I don't need help, that I'm exactly where I want to be." She shifted Maisie carefully. "This is home now. You and Maisie and this impossible homestead and the children who show up every morning wanting to learn. All of it." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She said it firmly. "Took me 40 years to find where I belong. I'm not giving that up." Caleb reached across the table, took her free hand. "I love you." "I know." Her smile was soft. "I love you too. Even when you're muddy and smell like horses and forget to tell me you'll be late for supper." That was one time. It was 3 times. Who's counting? They sat there as evening fell, Maisie sleeping between them, the future stretching out full of possibility and work, and the kind of happiness that comes from choosing each other every day. It wasn't perfect. Some days were hard. Some days the old insecurities crept back in, or the gossip got too loud, or the homestead demanded more than they had to give. But they faced it together, built something real out of determination and stubborn hope and the simple decision to try. And slowly, grudgingly, the settlement began to accept that Caleb Mercer and his unconventional wife might actually know what they were doing after all. The crisis came in August, when the heat was brutal and tempers ran even hotter. The McGrath family had a ranch 15 miles northwest of the settlement, isolated even by frontier standards. Jack McGrath ran it with his wife Ellen and their 3 young sons, scraping by on cattle and stubborn pride. They kept to themselves mostly, came into town maybe once a month for supplies. So when Ellen McGrath showed up at the Mercer homestead driving a wagon with her youngest son bleeding in the back, everyone knew something had gone terribly wrong. Mabel was teaching when the wagon came tearing up the road, dust flying. She stopped mid-sentence, the children turning to look. "Stay here," Mabel told them, already moving toward the wagon. Ellen was screaming before she even pulled the horses to a stop. "Please, someone help! It's Tommy! The plow! His leg!" Caleb came running from the barn. Together he and Mabel looked into the wagon bed and saw the damage. Tommy McGrath, maybe 8 years old, his left leg mangled below the knee. The plow blade had caught him somehow, torn through flesh and probably bone. Blood everywhere. Ellen was sobbing. Jack's pinned under the equipment, couldn't move it to get him free. I left him there, left my husband trapped, but I had to get Tommy help. Mom, oh. "You did right," Mabel said firmly, though her face had gone pale. "Caleb, we need the doctor. Doctor's in Billings for the week. Won't be back until Saturday." Caleb was already climbing into the wagon, pressing his hands against Tommy's leg to slow the bleeding. "We need to stabilize this ourselves." The next hours blurred together in a nightmare of makeshift medicine. Mabel sent the older students running, one to fetch Lars Halverson and any other men who could help free Jack McGrath, others to gather supplies and spread word. She and Caleb worked on Tommy in the cabin, doing everything they could with limited knowledge and even more limited supplies. Cleaning the wound, stopping the bleeding, splinting what was left of the leg while the boy screamed and Ellen held him down and prayed. By the time they'd done all they could, Tommy had passed out from pain. His breathing was shallow but steady. Whether the leg could be saved, whether infection would set in, those were questions for later. "I need to go back," Ellen said, her face streaked with tears and blood. "Need to get back to Jack." "Lars will handle it," Mabel assured her. "He took 6 men with him. They'll get your husband free." "But I should be there." "You should be here with your son." Mabel's voice was gentle but firm. "Let the men do what they do best. You stay here and be a mother." Ellen collapsed into a chair, finally letting herself fall apart. Caleb pulled Mabel aside. "This is bad." "I know. If that boy dies, he won't." Mabel said it with more confidence than she felt. "We got the bleeding stopped. If we can keep infection out and the fever down, he's got a chance." "And if we can't?" Mabel met his eyes squarely. "Then we tried everything we could, and that'll have to be enough." It wasn't enough for Caleb, but he didn't argue. Just went back to checking Tommy's bandages while Mabel dealt with the children who'd witnessed the whole thing and were now scared and upset. She got them settled outside with the older ones reading to the younger, then came back in to find Ellen staring at her son like she could keep him alive through will alone. "Mrs. McGrath," Mabel said softly, "when's the last time you ate?" I can't. You can and you will. Your boy needs you strong, not fainted from hunger." Mabel was already moving toward the stove. "I'm making eggs. You're going to eat them." It said something about Ellen's state that she didn't argue. Lars returned at sunset with news that was both better and worse than expected. They'd freed Jack McGrath, but the man had broken ribs and possibly internal injuries. He was alive, but in bad shape. Lars had left men to watch over him and brought back Ellen's 2 other sons, both terrified and confused. The Mercer cabin suddenly held 3 traumatized children, 2 distraught parents separated by 15 miles, and the very real possibility that this family was about to lose everything. "They can stay here," Mabel said when Caleb raised the question of space. "We'll make room." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." That turned out to be 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Tommy fighting infection and fever while Mabel nursed him with a patience Caleb hadn't known she possessed. 3 weeks of Ellen traveling back and forth to check on Jack while Mabel watched her other 2 sons. 3 weeks of the unofficial school being suspended because the teacher was too busy saving a child's life to worry about arithmetic lessons. The settlement watched it all happen with a mix of fascination and grudging respect. Even those who'd been most critical of Mabel found it hard to maintain their judgment when she was clearly killing herself to help a family in need. Mrs. Schneider, who'd walked out of church the day the bans were posted, showed up one morning with a basket of food. "Heard you've got extra mouths to feed," she said stiffly. "Thought this might help." Mabel took the basket, too tired to be surprised. "Thank you, Mrs. Schneider. That's very kind." "Yes, well," the older woman shifted uncomfortably. "I may not approve of everything you've done, but I can see you're a decent person, and that boy needs all the help he can get." It wasn't an apology, wasn't even close, but it was something. More gifts followed. Families brought supplies. Men offered to help Caleb with the homestead work he was neglecting. Women came to sit with Ellen and give Mabel a few hours of rest. By the 2nd week, Tommy's fever had broken, and the leg was showing signs of healing. Not perfect. He'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. But he'd walk. He'd survive. Jack McGrath improved more slowly. His ribs would heal, but Lars reported that the man was still in considerable pain, still unable to work. The ranch was falling apart without him, livestock neglected, repairs undone. "They're going to lose everything," Ellen said one night. She was sitting at the Mercer table, mending one of her son's shirts with hands that shook from exhaustion. "Even if Jack heals, we're too far behind now. The bank will foreclose before winter." Mabel exchanged glances with Caleb. They'd both been thinking the same thing, but hadn't said it out loud yet. "What if they didn't have to lose it?" Mabel asked carefully. Ellen looked up. "What do you mean?" "What if people helped? The settlement, I mean. Helped get your ranch back in order while Jack heals." "Why would they do that?" It was a fair question. The McGraths weren't popular, kept to themselves, didn't participate in town events, had nothing to offer in return. Because it's the right thing to do, Mabel said simply. And because if we don't look out for each other out here, who will? Ellen's eyes filled with tears. You've already done so much. Then a little more won't kill us. Mabel's voice was firm. Let me talk to some people, see what we can arrange. Caleb followed his wife outside after Ellen had gone to bed in the space they'd cleared for her in the barn. You sure about this? He asked. Getting the whole settlement involved? No, but it needs doing anyway. Mabel leaned against the porch rail, looking out at the dark landscape. That family is about to lose everything through no fault of their own. If we can prevent that, shouldn't we? People might not be willing to help. McGraths aren't exactly beloved. Then we find out what kind of community we really have. Mabel turned to face him. I'm tired of watching people suffer because nobody wants to be the first to reach out. Someone has to start. Might as well be us. Caleb felt pride swell in his chest. This woman who'd been judged and dismissed and treated like an inconvenience was trying to organize a rescue for people who'd never shown her a moment of kindness. All right, he said. Let's do it. The meeting happened 3 days later at the trading post. Henry Morrison had offered the space, and word had spread quickly. By the time Caleb and Mabel arrived, the room was packed, easily 40 people, maybe more. Mabel stood at the front, Caleb beside her. He could feel her nervousness, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Thank you all for coming. I'll keep this brief. She paused. The McGrath family is in trouble. Jack's injuries mean he can't work, and their ranch is falling apart. Without help, they'll lose everything. Silence. Mabel pressed on. I'm proposing we organize a work party. Men to help with repairs and livestock. Women to provide meals and supplies, just until Jack's back on his feet. Why should we? Someone called from the back. Caleb couldn't see who. McGrath's never helped anyone else. Because tomorrow it might be one of us, Mabel replied. Accidents don't care about popularity. Disaster doesn't check whether you're well-liked before it strikes. Mrs. Yates stood up. With all due respect, Mrs. Mercer, the McGraths made choices. They isolated themselves. They have to live with the consequences. They made the choice to ranch in a difficult location. They didn't choose to have a plow malfunction and nearly kill their son. Mabel's voice had an edge now. I've spent the last 3 weeks watching a mother try to hold her family together while her husband is hurt, and her child nearly died. And I've realized something. She paused, looking around the room. We all came out here for different reasons. Some of us were running from something. Some of us were looking for something. But we all chose this hard, brutal life in this unforgiving place, and the only way any of us survive is by helping each other when things go wrong. Pretty speech, someone muttered. It's not a speech. It's the truth. Mabel's hands were shaking, but her chin was up. I know most of you think I'm an opportunist who trapped a widower because I couldn't get a husband any other way. I know you whisper about my weight and my age and whether I'm really qualified to teach your children. I know all of it. The room had gone completely silent. But I also know that when I needed help, some of you gave it anyway. The Halversons, Henry Morrison, Mrs. Patterson. Even some of you who didn't approve still brought food when I was nursing Tommy McGrath. She paused. That's what community means. Helping even when it's inconvenient. Even when you don't like the person. Even when there's nothing in it for you. Lars Halverson stood. I'll help. Can spare 3 days next week to work the McGrath place. I'll go too, Tom Jensen added. Someone needs to check their equipment. Make sure nothing else is about to break. Henry Morrison nodded. I can put together a supply run. Food and medicine, whatever they need. More voices joined in. Not everyone. Some people left the meeting shaking their heads. But enough. Enough to make a difference. By the time the meeting ended, they had a plan. Men would rotate in shifts, spending days at the McGrath ranch doing repairs and tending livestock. Women would organize meals and supplies. It wouldn't fix everything, but it would buy the family time. Caleb found Mabel outside afterward, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. You all right? He asked. I think I'm going to be sick. You did good in there. I called out the entire settlement for being judgmental hypocrites. Yeah, that part was especially good. Caleb pulled her against his side. And it worked. Mabel laughed shakily. Barely. Barely counts. The work party started the following Monday. Caleb went with the first group, leaving Mabel home with Maisie and the McGrath boys. What they found at the ranch was worse than expected. Fences down, livestock scattered, equipment in desperate need of repair. Jack McGrath looked like hell, still bedbound and in obvious pain, but his eyes filled when he saw the men arrive. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your wife asked for help," Lars said simply, "and because we're neighbors. We didn't. Doesn't matter." Lars was already assessing the barn damage. "We're here now. Let us work." They worked for 3 days straight, fixed fences, rounded up cattle, repaired the barn roof, serviced equipment. It was hard, sweaty labor, but there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing progress, in watching Jack McGrath's face as his ranch came back from the edge. On the third day, Ellen McGrath pulled Caleb aside. "I want to thank your wife," she said, "for everything, for saving Tommy, for organizing this, for—" her voice cracked, "for seeing us as worth saving when we never did anything to deserve it." "Mabel doesn't work on deserve," Caleb said. "She works on need." Ellen nodded, wiping her eyes. Tell her when Tommy's better, I'm sending him to her school. All 3 of my boys. And if anyone has something to say about it, they can answer to me." It was a small thing, one family choosing to publicly support Mabel's teaching. But Caleb knew it mattered. He rode home that evening to find his wife in the garden with Maisie toddling between the rows. The baby had started walking recently, unsteady but determined. Mabel was following close behind, hands ready to catch if she fell. "How was it?" Mabel asked when she saw him. "Hard." "Good." Caleb dismounted, scooped up Maisie before she could faceplant into the carrots. "We made progress. They'll be all right." "Jack?" "Getting better. Ellen said to thank you." Mabel's smile was tired but genuine. "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything." Caleb shifted Maisie to one arm, pulled Mabel close with the other. "You saw a family in trouble and refused to let them drown. That's everything." They stood there in the garden while the sun set and Maisie babbled happily about nothing. It was peaceful, simple, the kind of moment that meant more than grand gestures or dramatic declarations. The McGrath recovery took 6 weeks total. By the time Jack was back on his feet, the ranch was functional again. Not perfect, but stable. The family wouldn't lose everything after all. True to her word, Ellen enrolled all 3 boys in Mabel's school. Other families followed, some because they genuinely wanted their children educated, others because being opposed to Mabel Mercer was starting to look petty when the woman had spent weeks nursing their neighbor's son back from death's door. By September, Mabel had 23 students. The makeshift schoolhouse had to be expanded, and Lars Halverson led another building party to add walls and a proper floor. It still wasn't official, but nobody seemed to care anymore. The school board made one last attempt to shut it down, citing regulations and proper procedure. Mabel listened to their complaints, then pointed out that she was providing a service families wanted and were willing to pay for. If the board wanted to compete, they were welcome to hire a better teacher. They didn't have a response to that. October brought the first serious cold, a reminder that winter was coming. Caleb started the annual preparations, cutting extra wood, checking the cabin for leaks, making sure they had supplies to last through months of isolation. Except this year felt different. This year, the cabin wasn't a prison. It was a home. And the isolation didn't feel as heavy when you had someone to share it with. One evening, Mabel looked up from the mending she was working on and said, "I'm pregnant." Caleb, who'd been oiling his rifle, nearly dropped it. "What?" "Pregnant? With child? Going to have a baby around April, near as I can figure." The words didn't quite compute. "But you're 41. I know. Didn't think it was possible either." Mabel's hands had gone still on the fabric. Do you want this?" Did he want it? Caleb thought about another baby, about Maisie having a sibling, about building a family with Mabel that was theirs from the beginning. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, I want this." Mabel's face crumpled with relief. "I was so scared you'd think I'd trapped you, that this was too much too fast." Caleb crossed the room, pulled her into his arms. "You didn't trap me, and nothing about you has ever been too much." She cried against his chest, happy tears this time. while Maisie watched from her corner with the serious expression she got when adults were being confusing. The pregnancy changed things. Mabel tired more easily, had to stop teaching some days when the morning sickness got bad. But she refused to slow down more than absolutely necessary, insisting that women had been having babies while working for thousands of years, and she wasn't about to be the first to stop. Caleb worried anyway. Couldn't help it. The memories of Sarah bleeding out were still too fresh, too vivid. "I'm not Sarah," Mabel told him one night when she caught him hovering. "I'm built different, stronger. I'll be fine." "You don't know that." "No, but worrying won't change anything." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach where a small bump was starting to show. "This baby is going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. We're all going to be fine." Caleb wanted to believe her, tried to, but the fear sat in his chest like a stone. Winter came hard and early that year. By November, they were snowed in more often than not. The school shut down temporarily, parents unwilling to risk their children in the brutal weather. Mabel used the time to rest and prepare, sewing baby clothes and organizing supplies. Caleb kept busy with maintenance and hunting, but mostly he watched his wife and daughter and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The McGraths sent a gift in December, a beautiful cradle that Jack had built himself, intricate and sturdy. The note with it said simply, "For everything you did for us. Thank you." Mabel cried when she saw it. Seemed like she cried at everything these days, hormones making her emotions closer to the surface. Caleb had learned to just hold her and wait it out. Christmas came and went quietly. Just the three of them, soon to be four, in the cabin. Lars and Ingrid invited them for dinner, but the roads were too bad to risk. They made do with what they had and found it was enough. On New Year's Day, Mabel woke Caleb before dawn. "It's time," she said. Caleb's heart stopped. "Time for what?" "The baby's coming now. It's too early. You said April." "Well, the baby disagrees." Mabel was already moving, gathering supplies with the calm efficiency that meant she was terrified but hiding it well. "You need to get help." "I can't leave you." "You have to. I need someone who knows what they're doing, and that's not you." She gripped his arm. "Please, Caleb, get Ingrid Halverson. She's delivered 6 babies. She'll know what to do." The ride to the Halverson place was the longest of Caleb's life. 2 miles through snowdrifts in the dark, his horse struggling with every step. He pounded on their door hard enough to wake the whole family. Lars opened it, hair standing up, looking ready to fight. "Mercer? What?" "Mabel's in labor. Need Ingrid, now." Ingrid appeared behind her husband, already pulling on her coat. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know. She just said it was time." "Then we need to hurry." The ride back was even worse. Ingrid rode behind Caleb, holding on tight while the horse fought through snow. By the time they reached the cabin, Mabel's screams were audible from outside. Caleb's blood turned to ice. Ingrid was off the horse and inside before he could even dismount. He followed, found Mabel on the bed, face twisted with pain. "You're early," Ingrid said, examining her quickly. "But not dangerously so. Baby's coming fast, though. You got water boiling?" Caleb scrambled to help, doing whatever Ingrid told him. Fetching water, finding clean cloth, keeping Maisie occupied when she woke up frightened by her mother's cries. The hours that followed were a blur of fear and helplessness. Caleb had fought in wars, survived blizzards, killed men with his bare hands. None of it prepared him for watching Mabel suffer and being able to do nothing except hold her hand and tell her she was strong. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came. A girl, smaller than Maisie had been, but crying with impressive volume. Ingrid cleaned her quickly, checked her over, then wrapped her in the blanket Mabel had prepared. "She's perfect," Ingrid said, handing the baby to Mabel. "Small, but perfect." Mabel held her daughter, their daughter, with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Caleb knelt beside the bed, looking at this tiny person they'd made together. She had Mabel's nose, his dark hair, eyes that were still the murky blue of all newborns, but would probably change to something else eventually. "She's beautiful," he said. "She's ours." Mabel looked at him, eyes bright with joy and exhaustion. "We made this, Caleb. We made a whole person." He kissed her forehead, too overwhelmed for words. Ingrid finished cleaning up, then pulled Caleb aside. "Your wife did well, better than well. But she needs rest now, and someone needs to watch her for fever or heavy bleeding." I will. I know you will. Ingrid smiled. You're a good husband, Caleb Mercer. Better than most give you credit for. She left after extracting a promise that they'd send for her if anything seemed wrong. Caleb settled into the chair beside the bed, watching Mabel sleep with the baby tucked against her side. Maisie climbed into his lap, looking at her new sister with curiosity. Baby, she said, one of her few clear words. That's right. That's your sister. Caleb smoothed her hair. You're going to help take care of her, aren't you? Maisie nodded solemnly, like this was a very important job. They named her Rose, after Mabel's mother. She was a fussy baby, cried more than Maisie ever had. But Mabel handled it with patience that amazed Caleb. Even when she was exhausted, even when Rose wouldn't settle, she never lost her temper or complained. I waited too long for this to waste it being frustrated, she said one night when Caleb tried to take over. Let me enjoy every minute, even the hard ones. Word of Rose's birth spread through the settlement. People came to visit, some out of genuine warmth, others out of curiosity. Ellen McGrath brought food and offered to help with anything needed. Mrs. Patterson sent baby clothes. Even Mrs. Schneider stopped by with a gift, though she didn't stay long. By the time Rose was a month old, the visits had slowed. Life returned to its normal rhythms. The school reopened once the weather improved. Mabel taught with Rose in a sling against her chest, the baby sleeping through lessons or nursing when she needed to. The children adored her, would ask to hold her during breaks. Maisie treated her little sister like a beloved doll, always wanting to help. Spring came late but beautiful. The world turned green again, snow melting into streams that fed the valley. Caleb expanded the homestead, built a proper barn, added a room to the cabin, started planning for a larger house they could build in a year or two. Mabel's school continued growing. By June, she had 30 students and was turning people away. The settlement had officially recognized what she was doing, even if they wouldn't call it a real school. Parents paid tuition. Children learned. It worked. One afternoon in early July, Caleb was fixing fence when he saw a rider coming up the road. As they got closer, he recognized the horse. It belonged to the settlement's courier service, usually meant official business. The man handed over an envelope. Letter for Mrs. Mercer came all the way from St. Louis. Caleb thanked him, took the letter inside. Mabel was feeding Rose, Maisie playing nearby. Letter for you, Caleb said. From your sister, looks like. Mabel's expression flickered. She hadn't heard from her sister since that first letter almost a year ago. Can you open it? My hands are full. Caleb broke the seal, unfolded the pages, started reading. What's it say? Mabel asked after a moment. She's coming to visit, wants to meet you and the children, says... He paused, reading ahead. Says she was wrong to judge you, that if you're happy, that's all that matters. Mabel's eyes went bright. She's really coming? Says she'll arrive in September, plans to stay a month. A month? Mabel looked around the cabin like she was seeing it through her sister's eyes. We'll need to... The house is too small. We don't have... We've got 3 months to prepare. We'll manage. Caleb set the letter on the table. This is good, right? You're happy about this? I don't know. Mabel laughed shakily. Terrified, mostly. What if she hates it here? What if she thinks I made a mistake? Then she's wrong. Caleb crossed the room, sat beside his wife. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Built a life. That's not something to apologize for. Mabel leaned against him, Rose still nursing contentedly. When did you get so wise? Must be all the practice living with you. They spent the summer preparing for the visit, though there wasn't much they could do beyond the usual work. The cabin was what it was. The homestead was what it was. Either Mabel's sister would accept it, or she wouldn't. September came with perfect weather. The day Catherine Rowan arrived, the settlement was buzzing with curiosity. Another Rowan woman, people whispered. Wonder if she's as unusual as the first. Caleb picked her up from the coach station in town. Catherine was tall and thin. Everything Mabel wasn't physically, but she had the same sharp eyes, the same direct way of speaking. You must be Caleb, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I've heard a lot about you. Likewise. I imagine most of it wasn't flattering. That depends on who was doing the talking. Catherine smiled. I like you already. Let's go meet my nieces. The reunion between the sisters was emotional. Lots of tears, lots of hugging, lots of talking over each other. Caleb took the children outside to give them privacy. When he came back an hour later, Catherine was holding Rose and listening to Mabel explain how she'd built her school from nothing. "You always were the stubborn one," Catherine said fondly. "Mother used to say you'd move mountains if someone told you it couldn't be done." "I miss her," Mabel said quietly. "She'd be proud of you, of all this." Catherine looked around the cabin. "It's not what I expected." "Disappointed?" "Surprised. You seem happy, really happy." "I didn't think that was possible for you," Mabel laughed. "Neither did I." Catherine stayed for 4 weeks, helped with the school, played with the children, got to know Caleb beyond the brief letters Mabel had sent. And slowly, Caleb watched her opinions shift from skeptical to approving. "You're good for her," Catherine told him one evening. They were sitting on the porch while Mabel put the children to bed inside. "I wasn't sure at first. Thought maybe you were taking advantage, but I can see you love her." "I do. And these children, you treat them both like they're yours." "They are mine." Caleb didn't even have to think about it. "Maisie, Rose, any others that come along, they're all mine." Catherine nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology. When Mabel wrote about marrying you, I thought she was making a mistake. Thought she was so desperate for a family that she'd settled for anything. But this..." She gestured at the homestead, the lights glowing in the cabin windows. "This is real. This is good. She deserves good." "She does. And I'm glad she found it." When Catherine left in October, she hugged Mabel for a long time. "Come visit us," she said. "Bring your family. Let the children meet their cousins." "Maybe," Mabel said. "Someday." "And Mabel? I'm sorry for not believing in you, for thinking you couldn't have this." "You weren't the only one." Mabel's smile was soft. "I didn't always believe in it either." After Catherine left, Caleb found Mabel in the garden, looking out at the mountains. "You all right?" he asked. "Better than all right." She turned to him. "I spent so long thinking I wasn't enough, that I'd never have a real family, a real home, and now..." She gestured around them. "Now I have all of it, more than I ever dreamed of." "You earned it. We earned it. Together." She took his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked right through me. For taking a chance on the fat schoolteacher nobody wanted. For building this life with me." Caleb pulled her close. "Best decision I ever made." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the cabin, they could hear Maisie talking to Rose in the nonsense language toddlers use. Could hear their life continuing without them for this one moment. Winter came again, as it always did. But this time, Caleb wasn't afraid of it, wasn't dreading the cold and isolation. Because the cabin was full now, full of noise and laughter and the kind of love that grows from choosing each other every day. The school closed for winter, but Mabel kept teaching the children who could make it through the snow. Other families started asking if she'd teach their children too, even those who'd been most opposed at first. "You're becoming respectable," Caleb teased her one evening. "Don't let it get around. I've got a reputation to maintain." By the second winter, the unofficial school was the most popular in the region. The school board had given up fighting it. Some of the original teachers had even come to Mabel for advice. She handled it all with the same practical grace she brought to everything. No gloating, no "I told you so." Just steady work and the satisfaction of knowing she was making a difference. On their second anniversary, Caleb took Mabel into town for dinner at the hotel. The first time they'd done anything like that. People stared, but Mabel walked in with her head high, holding his arm like she belonged there. Because she did belong there. Had earned her place through courage and kindness, and refusing to let other people's judgment define her worth. They sat at a table by the window, eating steak and potatoes, talking about their plans for expanding the homestead, about maybe building that bigger house next summer, about whether they wanted more children. "I'm 43, Mabel said. "Probably shouldn't push my luck. But if it happens, then it happens." Her smile was peaceful. "I'm not afraid anymore. Of anything." Caleb raised his glass. "To not being afraid. To building something real," Mabel countered. "To us." They drank to that. To themselves. to the unlikely partnership that had started with a blizzard and a dying baby and had somehow grown into this. A marriage that worked, a family that thrived, a life that mattered. Outside the hotel window, snow was starting to fall. Caleb watched it and felt none of the old dread, just appreciation for the beauty of it, for the way it transformed the world into something clean and new. They walked home through the snow, Mabel's hand warm in his. The cabin lights glowed ahead of them, Mrs. Patterson watching the children as promised, their whole life waiting inside those walls. Caleb thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, broken and grieving and convinced he was done with everything that mattered. That man wouldn't recognize who he'd become, wouldn't believe this kind of happiness was possible. But it was possible. He was living proof. They all were, Caleb and Mabel and the children they were raising together. Proof that sometimes the things we think will break us actually rebuild us into something stronger. That the people we're told aren't good enough are often exactly what we need. That love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, but it's real nonetheless. The settlement had learned that lesson slowly, grudgingly, had watched Caleb Mercer and Mabel Rowan build something that shouldn't have worked and couldn't help but respect it eventually. Some families had even started looking at each other differently, questioning whether they'd been measuring worth by the wrong standards all along. Years later, when Maisie was old enough to understand, she'd ask her mother how she and Caleb fell in love. Mabel would tell her the truth, that it wasn't love at first sight or grand romance. It was desperation and necessity and two broken people deciding to try. And somewhere in all that trying, they'd found something neither of them expected. "But you're happy now?" Maisie would ask. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Mabel would answer. "Because I stopped waiting for someone to see my worth and started showing it myself. And your father was smart enough to pay attention." It was a simple truth, but it mattered. Worth isn't something we wait for others to recognize. It's something we claim for ourselves, then defend when the world tries to take it away. Mabel had claimed hers, had walked through a blizzard to save a child, had faced down judgment and cruelty, had built a school from nothing and a family from hope. She'd been called desperate and opportunistic, and worse, and she'd proved every one of those labels wrong by simply living her life with courage and grace. And Caleb, the broken widower everyone pitied, had found his way back to living by choosing to see what everyone else overlooked, by recognizing that strength comes in different forms, that beauty isn't just what meets the eye, that the best partnerships are built on respect and trust as much as attraction. Together, they'd created something the frontier needed, a reminder that community means helping even when it's hard, that families come in all forms, that the measure of a person isn't their appearance or their past, but what they do when it matters. The unofficial school Mabel ran became official eventually. The settlement built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as the teacher with full pay and benefits. Other communities heard about her methods and asked her to train their teachers. She became known throughout the territory as one of the best educators around. The homestead grew too. Caleb and Mabel built that bigger house, had one more child, a boy they named James, raised all 3 children to be kind and stubborn and unafraid of hard work. Maisie grew up knowing 2 mothers, the one who birthed her and the one who raised her, and loved them both in different ways. On cold winter nights, when the family gathered around the fire, Caleb would sometimes think about that first terrible storm, about holding his dying daughter and thinking his life was over, about the knock on the door that changed everything. He'd look at Mabel, older now, grayer, still carrying extra weight that had never bothered him for a second, and feel grateful. Grateful that she'd been brave enough to walk through a blizzard, grateful that she'd refused to let cruelty defeat her, grateful that she'd said yes to building this life together. And Mabel would catch him looking and know exactly what he was thinking, would smile that knowing smile and go back to her knitting or her book or whatever she was doing, because they'd both learned that the best love doesn't need constant declaration. It lives in the everyday choices, in showing up, in staying, in building something that lasts. The settlement changed around them. New families arrived. Old prejudices slowly faded. The world kept turning, kept demanding, kept testing everyone who tried to make a home in this hard place. But through it all, the Mercer family endured. Not because they were perfect, they weren't. Not because life got easier, it didn't. But because they'd learned the only truth that really matters on the frontier or anywhere else. We survive by holding on to each other, by refusing to give up, and by having the courage to love even when the world says we shouldn't. That was the legacy Mabel and Caleb built, not just in their children or their homestead or the school that educated generations of frontier kids, but in the example they set, that worth is earned through action, that love is a choice we make every day, and that the people everyone underestimates are often the ones who change everything. It wasn't a perfect story, wasn't smooth or easy or free from pain, but it was real. And in the end, that made it perfect enough.